Is there anger, is there hatred in your heart, Davontae?
No.
Why not?
That 9 years could have been 20 years. That 9 years could have been the 39 years of beyond.
It's like a torture I went through, and I know I'm sitting in jail for something I didn't do.
What do you think of those two detectives now?
You know, it took a while to forgive them for what they did. But I want to say, out of all honesty, that I do forgive them for what they did.
Can you imagine being accused of something that you didn't do? Even worse, can you imagine actually getting convicted and sentenced for something you're not actually guilty of? Sadly, the justice system does get it wrong from time to time, and innocent people get put behind bars for years, and sometimes even decades. Years of their lives are stolen from them because they were mistaken for the real criminal, and yet there is nothing they can do to get themselves out of the situation. Their only hope is that somehow, some way, they can get their conviction appeal, and maybe one day have their name cleared. The following stories will show the heartfelt reactions of innocent convicts finally being set free.
Here in Seminole County, a man who was sentenced to die, literally was on death row, has had all charges against him dropped.
And I thank you for it, from the bottom of my heart.
Clemente Araujo almost had to pay the ultimate price of life for something he did not actually do.
With tears in his eyes, Clemente Araujo thanked his team, his family, and the judge who told him his 15-year nightmare is over.
Clemente, who was 38 years old at the time he was freed in 2018, was from Honduras. He moved to Altamont Springs, Florida as an immigrant. He was a hard worker who worked as a dishwasher and food prepper. But in 2004, he found himself in a mess of trouble when his two neighbors, Cheryl Williams and Carol Barris, were found dead. They had been killed with a sharp weapon. Clemente was the first person to find the bodies of 47-year-old Cheryl and 68-year-old Carol, but he failed to notify law enforcement of what happened. This was because he was afraid that as an undocumented immigrant, he would get into trouble with the law and possibly be deported. He said that he had stumbled upon the bodies accidentally when he entered their trailer looking to borrow something. But the fact that he did not report the deaths would ultimately cause Clemente to look very guilty. It didn't help that he left lots of evidence at the scene, including his fingerprints. Some of the victims' DNA was also found on his clothing, but the defense would later claim that this evidence only existed because he had bent down to touch the victims to see whether or not they were still breathing. You can imagine that this would be a pretty difficult thing to convince a jury of. Clemente was also at a disadvantage because he wasn't given a very good defense lawyer. They didn't even ask for a DNA test to be done to determine if any of the bodily fluids found at the scene of the crime belonged to him. The prosecution also tried to say that the wounds inflicted on the victims appeared to be caused by a tool that Clemente would have access to from the kitchen where he worked. This was all they needed to pin everything on him. While in court, Clemente cried out emotionally to proclaim his innocence.
I didn't do it. I don't kill anybody.
However, he was convicted and sentenced to pay the price with his life. He spent more than 15 years behind bars while he awaited his death. But then, a miracle happened. There's a nonprofit organization known as the Innocence Project, which works toward criminal justice reform. They have helped many people who were falsely incarcerated achieve justice and get another chance at freedom. The organization heard about Clemente's story and they decided they wanted to help. So they were able to supply him with a top-notch legal team who dedicated themselves to trying to save his life. They would have to go back to the beginning and figure out what really went down.
It started in 2004 when the Honduran immigrant was accused of killing two women, a mother and her adult daughter, in their trailer. From the start, Araujo said he found the women dead.
Through DNA evidence, Clemente's legal team was able to prove that none of the red body fluids found at the scene of the crime were Clemente's. But that was not all. While one of his fingerprints had been found on what was believed to be the murder weapon, there was much more to the story. When he entered the home and found it ransacked and saw the bodies, he panicked. He saw the weapon lying next to the victims and picked it up in case he needed to defend himself if the intruder was still somewhere in the home and waiting to attack. He later dropped the knife outside. The story doesn't end there. One of the key witnesses in the case, Samantha Williams, ended up knowing more about the case than she let on. Samantha was the daughter of Cheryl and the granddaughter of Carol. She was one of the people who were the quickest to point a finger at Clemente. Samantha struggled with mental illness and, as it would turn out, had threatened to take the life of her grandmother before. In fact, she had been in and out of the psychiatric ward more than 60 times. During one of those visits, she made cryptic comments about her grandmother and mother's deaths, suggesting that she might know what actually happened to them. In court, Samantha admitted that she had a violent temper. She even acknowledged that she had fought with her mother the night before the bodies were discovered, but she denied taking their lives. But according to 5 people who testified against her in court, that wasn't what she told them. They said that Samantha had confessed to the murders in private. In fact, one of her neighbors said that at a barbecue, Samantha had told her, "I'm crazy, I'm evil, I killed my grandmother and my mother." With this new information at hand, Clemente was finally granted a new trial in October 2018, and after a long process, he was later exonerated and released from prison. Here is what the judge presiding over the case had to say about this decision.
I had to look at this case in a certain way based upon what the Supreme Court decided.
While in court, Clemente revealed that up until he got his new lawyers, nobody had ever believed in his innocence, apart from his own mother. Watch as Clemente raised his fist in the air in celebration and embraced his legal team as he discovered that his long nightmare was finally over.
Because of his immigration status, Clemente Aguirre Jarquin was initially in federal custody, but he was able to make bond and is now enjoying his freedom for the first time in 14 years.
In a video that was published by the Innocence Project on YouTube, Clemente spoke out just a short time after he found out that he was about to be a free man once again. He expressed extreme gratitude.
Hello, my name is Clemente Aguirre. I'm from Honduras. I was exonerated 48 hours ago. Thanks to God and the Innocent Project.
But he also took the time to acknowledge just how much time he had to spend behind bars because the system got it wrong.
14 years, 4 months, and 19 days I've been incarcerated. 3 months, 10 years, 3 months of them in death row.
He ended his statement with a message of hope for what is yet to come.
But today is a brighter day, a new day, and I got good hopes for the future.
Did not put a dollar figure on the injustice Devonte Stanford experienced, but he says he can finally move on with his life after he was nearly robbed of it.
Devonte Stanford has quite the story to tell after he was framed for murder by Detroit law enforcement. His story goes back to 2007 when he was only 14 years old and got accused of something he actually had no part in. It was the middle of the night when 2 men wielding guns forced their way into a family home. They took the lives of 3 men and 1 woman. Another woman was badly injured but able to survive when she ran and hid in an upstairs bathroom. There was also a young child who had been asleep in the home and was not injured in the altercation. The home that had been targeted belonged to a reputable narcotics dealer by the name of Michael Robinson. The other victims who were killed alongside him were Nicole Chapman, Brian Dixon, and D'Angelo McNuriel. A Detroit officer happened to live near where the incident occurred. He heard the noise and came running with his gun drawn. He immediately saw 2 men running away from the home and fired his weapon at them. They fired back at him but got away. Neither the officer nor the 2 men fleeing were struck. The officer then called for a search dog that helped trace the casings that were left on the ground to a nearby area where it was believed the suspects had escaped by car. Meanwhile, the officer wasn't the only neighbor nearby who heard the altercation going on at Michael Robinson's house. Young Davontae had also heard it, and his curiosity got the best of him. Quietly, he slipped out of his home wearing only his pajamas and made his way toward the scene. His mother begged him not to go. She would later reflect on that night and how big of a mistake her son made by leaving the home that night.
You said don't go. He did. And then the nightmare began.
Basically, going outside cost him his life, going outside cost him his youth, cost him his innocence.
Davontae would have hardly come across as a threat to anyone. Not only was he young, but he was small in stature and blind in one eye. Nevertheless, when law enforcement spotted him around the scene of the crime, they quickly became suspicious. Likely scared, he was unwilling to answer any of their questions, and the officers were not about to let the child go free. They took him back to his grandmother's house to get permission to take him to the police station. They then swabbed him for traces of gunfire residue, but found nothing on him. Still, they didn't give up. They started questioning him even without a parent or guardian present. Because he was only 14 years old, this was very much against the law. Law enforcement continued to try to persuade the teen to confess until it got to the point that he made up a story about meeting up with some other kids at a local fast food restaurant and leaving from there to commit the robbery. The details of his story didn't even make sense. It was 3 a.m. at this point, and the restaurant had long been closed. Nevertheless, the officers were convinced that they had their guy. They continued to hold him without a guardian present and even refused to let him call a lawyer. While this was going on, one of the officers wrote up an incriminating report with made-up details to make Davontae look guilty. He even included false details saying that the teen had been able to draw out the floor plan of the house that got robbed. This was totally made up in an attempt to pin the murders on Davontae. Sadly, it worked, and the teen was arrested and charged with all 4 murders. When he went to trial, things quickly went from bad to worse for him. His defense lawyer, a man named Robert Slamika, didn't even have a sliver of hope to offer him. In fact, he even went as far as telling him that if he ever wanted a chance to see freedom again someday, his only option was to plead guilty. And so, with the convincing of his mother, who thought that this was his only choice, that is what he did. But his mother never truly believed that her son had done anything wrong.
You would take his place if it were possible.
Yes. I felt that I failed him as a mother because I couldn't help him.
Tragically, Davontae was just 15 years old when he was convicted and sentenced to spend the next 37 to 90 years in prison. It seemed that all hope had been lost, but then just a few weeks later, something totally unexpected happened. A hitman by the name of Vincent Smothers had just been arrested and confessed to carrying out 12 murders after being hired to do so. He admitted to the killings at the Robinson home and was even able to give specific details about what happened.
Did you somebody in there? Yes. Male, female, what? 3 guys, and I believe a female in the house.
Vincent probably could have gotten away with this. After all, someone was already convicted for the crime he committed, so why did he confess?
He wasn't doing this because he felt bad for Davontae. He was doing it because he just wanted to take responsibility for what he had done.
You would think that this would be enough to free Davontae right away. Sadly, it wasn't. But it did gain the attention of a program called Northwestern Center of Wrongfully Convicted Youth. They pushed to have the case reopened, and after 9 long years behind bars, Davontae was finally freed in 2016. Davontae spent much of his youth in prison for a crime that he did not commit. You would think that would result in quite a bit of resentment, but that is not the case for Davontae. He has a great sense of perspective because he recognizes something very important. As bad as things were, they could have been worse. He could still be locked up had things taken a different turn.
Is there anger, is there hatred in your heart, Davontae?
No.
Why not?
That 9 years could have been 20 years. That 9 years could have been the 39 years or beyond.
Davontae does not view the years he spent wrongfully incarcerated as a waste, but he did make sure that he got the justice he deserved by seeking out a proper settlement to make up for his pain and suffering.
29-year-old reached a $7.5 million settlement with the city of Detroit for its role in his wrongful conviction and incarceration for crimes he did not commit.
In an interview after his release, Davontae detailed the horrifying days he spent in prison as he was forced to always look over his shoulder.
How bad was it?
Very bad. I mean, like, the mental and physical that you receive by the guards on a daily basis is just something else.
While behind bars, Davontae said that every day the guards would try to break him down further and further. But if anything, it only forced him to become tougher. It could be a long time before the reality of his freedom finally hits Davontae. After all, he wasn't sure if he would ever be set free.
Every day I wake up and, like, I see that I'm seeing like a room instead of a cell. It just like amazed me. You know, it was times I thought like I was gonna die in prison.
Davontae also took the time to express his gratitude for Vincent Smothers. If he hadn't confessed, there's a good chance that Davontae would still be locked up to this day.
He protected me, not the cops. The cops took advantage of me. It's because of this man. You know, I'm able to walk and breathe and just, you know, be at peace so I can sleep again. It's because of him.
Do you think that a $7.5 million settlement is fair for everything that Davontae endured? Or does he deserve more for those 9 years behind bars? Let us know in the comments.
Van Dyke Perry and Gregory Counts couldn't hold back the emotion and tears as they sat in a Manhattan courtroom today, finally exonerated of a crime they were accused of in 1991.
What can only be described as a nightmare for then 19-year-old Gregory Counts and 21-year-old Van Dyke Perry occurred in 1991, all because of a lie. They were both accused of kidnapping a woman and committing violent acts against her. It wasn't until years later that the alleged victim came forward to reveal that it never actually happened. By then, both Van Dyke and Gregory had already paid the price for her life.
The victim recanted after both men had already served their sentences. The alleged victim and the convicted men knew each other at the time.
The complainant now admits that her boyfriend forced her to lie.
It was revealed that the woman agreed to lie in order to get both men sent away because her boyfriend owed them money. She believed that her boyfriend would become violent with her if she refused to falsely accuse these men, so she agreed to go along with the plan that would destroy the lives of innocent men. Following her lie, both men were taken into custody in January 1991. Despite the fact that there were a lot of inconsistencies in this woman's story, they were both convicted in March of the following year. Van Dyke was sentenced to 7 to 14 years behind bars, and Gregory was sentenced to 16 to 48 years. It was nothing short of a very unfair tragedy. After Van Dyke completed his sentence, he was released in 2001, but he had no interest in discussing what he had gone through ever again. Meanwhile, Gregory was left to serve out his significantly longer sentence. He described the agony of sitting in prison day after day, despite knowing that he did not deserve to be there.
It's like a torture I went through, and I know I'm sitting in jail for something I didn't do.
But then one day, while spending time in solitary confinement, Gregory came across a book that gave him a small shred of hope. It was a book called Actual Innocence, written by the Innocence Project. This was the first time he began to wonder if there was someone on the outside who could help him. He was able to connect with the Innocence Project and ask them to investigate his case. This is what finally got the ball rolling in his favor. In 2016, investigators were able to locate the woman who had accused these two men. She admitted that at the time she had been struggling with substance abuse and that maybe some of the details of her story had been wrong. It wasn't until April 2018 that she finally came clean about everything. She reportedly gave in, telling investigators, "What can I talk about except the shame that I have? I mean, what else is there to ask me? It never happened." It was that same year that both men were finally exonerated. It was not only her confession, but DNA evidence that helped Van Dyke and Gregory get cleared once and for all. Following his release from prison, Van Dyke was able to restart his life. He got married and started a family. He was able to start his own business and began working towards all those dreams he once feared may never come true. But despite his exoneration, nothing will ever fully make up for what he was forced to go through.
Never going to be over. The reason why, because it's torment in my life and it's my past. You understand?
Meanwhile, Gregory expressed his gratitude towards all those who helped him get through this impossibly difficult time in his life.
I thank God that at the highest level I give my thanks to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I got my family, and my family stood by me all this time through the whole process.
In total, when all was said and done, Van Dyke served a total of 11 years behind bars for the false accusation, and Gregory served 26. This is obviously a huge chunk of two people's lives that was basically stolen for no reason at all. Do you think the woman who falsely accused these men should pay some sort of price for what she did? Or should law enforcement be blamed for throwing two innocent men behind bars before making a full investigation? Let us know your opinion in the comments. Eric Keeley and Ralph Lee are yet another wrongfully convicted pair that were saved by the efforts of the Innocence Project. In 1993, they were accused and convicted of robbing and killing a 22-year-old Peru immigrant and college student named Tito Marino. Tito had been working at his family's video store in New Jersey when the brutal attack took place. It was a tragic story of a life taken too soon. The only problem was that law enforcement didn't have the right suspects. Eric and Ralph were questioned separately for hours on end by law enforcement. As often happens in cases of people who are wrongfully convicted and incarcerated, law enforcement asked the men so many questions that at times they got confused and told contradictory stories. It didn't help matters that Eric had a brain injury as a result of a car accident. This made it difficult for him to understand and process what was going on, and he could have accidentally incriminated himself. Eric and Ralph were both sentenced to life behind bars. For 14 long years, it appeared that this was the only reality that they could hope for. But then the Innocence Project heard about their story and decided to dig a little deeper. At this point in time, there was more advanced technology and criminal justice tools available than what had been around in the early 1990s. With the help of a DNA test that was called for in 2010, it was determined that neither Eric nor Ralph's DNA was connected to the scene of the crime. It was connected, however, to a different man. This man had been released from prison just 3 months before Tito's murder occurred, after doing time for yet another robbery. It was finally clear to their defenders that neither Eric nor Ralph had ever had any connection to this crime at all, but it would take time to prove this to the court in order to finally have them released. The day that Eric and Ralph's charges were officially dropped in 2018 came as a shock to everyone, including their own legal team.
We went into court on an issue of the electronic monitoring and whether they would have to pay a daily fee, and we were there to fill out a 5A form, so we wouldn't have to pay the fee, and the prosecutor interrupted.
This clip was taken just minutes after the news broke that prosecutor Camila Valdez had moved to have charges against these men dismissed.
It said that she has a matter that she'd like to bring to the court's attention before anything, and then she just simply moved to dismiss the indictment.
It's a beautiful reaction. It was great. It was excellent.
The joy and relief on everyone's faces was evident. This was long overdue and came after both Eric and Ralph had spent over 24 years in jail. It is expected that these men will likely sue as a result of their wrongful conviction, but the amount in which they will be seeking is not yet clear. How much do you think these men deserve after paying this kind of price, despite being innocent?
How long did you spend in jail, Juan?
Total, it was about 6 months.
6 months?
6 months.
And some of that time in maximum security, Supermax?
Yes, yes. I felt like I didn't sleep for 6 months.
As a result of lies and crooked members of law enforcement, Juan Catalan was accused of a murder he never committed. In fact, unlike his brother Mario Catalan, Juan had never even been in trouble with the law before. This made-for-television story all started on May 12, 2003. 16-year-old Martha Pueblo was found killed outside of her home. Law enforcement didn't have to look too far to find a motive. This was because it was well known that just a week before, she had testified against Mario Catalan in court. Catalan was a well-known gang member in the Los Angeles community, and he was believed to be an accessory in a recent murder. Despite not having any concrete proof, law enforcement believed that Juan had killed Martha to get revenge for testifying against Mario. They arrested him and charged him with murder. But Juan happened to have a very good alibi. That was because on the day that the murder happened, Juan was nowhere near Martha's home. He was at a Dodgers game with his young daughter and a group of friends. He even placed a call from inside the stadium that day that proved he had been there and not at the scene of the crime. But despite all this, he would still have to spend 6 horrific months wrongfully incarcerated. While this is certainly a much shorter sentence compared to others in this video, the way that Juan would later describe life in a maximum security prison was unlike any nightmare you could imagine. He would often hear inmates being hurt, not only by other inmates, but by guards as well, all the while knowing there was nothing he could personally do to help them.
I mean, I'd never seen so many people just, when you hear a grown man, cry for help, I mean, and you're like helpless.
But what Juan and probably law enforcement didn't expect was a special detail from the day Martha was murdered was about to change the direction of the case in a very major way. That is because on that particular day, comedian Larry David just so happened to have been filming an episode of the Curb Your Enthusiasm while at Dodgers Stadium. In a clip from the episode, although blurry, you can clearly see that Juan really was at the stadium that day. This was proof enough to finally exonerate him. In fact, this story became so well known that a 2017 film called Long Shot was later inspired by it. It starred Juan himself, Larry David, and other well-known people. Despite the fact that Juan now knows that he was used as a pawn and set up for a crime he never did, he somehow finds it in his heart to forgive the detectives who played key roles in getting him wrongfully convicted.
What do you think of those two detectives now?
You know, it took a while to forgive them for what they did. But I want to say, out of all honesty, that I do forgive them.
As shocking as it sounds, so many of these individuals were not only wrongfully accused and convicted, it's more shocking that many of them were able to forgive the people who put them behind bars in the first place. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on our next video.